Emma Collins ran through the amber wheat fields, her small feet kicking up dust in the evening light. The 7-year-old girl laughed as she chased a glowing bug she had never seen before. It flickered blue and green, dancing just beyond her reach. She didn't notice how far she had gone from home. Her father, Daniel Collins, stood on the porch of their dome house, watching the sun set over New Haven Colony. He was a tall man with tired eyes, someone who had left his military life behind to give his daughter peace. His wife Catherine came out and handed him a cup of coffee. "Where's Emma?" Catherine asked. Daniel pointed toward the fields. "Chasing bugs again," they both smiled. Life on New Haven was simple and good. The colony had been here for 12 years without any trouble. 2,000 humans lived in the settlement, farming the land and building a future far from Earth's crowded cities. The stars above them were bright and beautiful, and for 12 years, nothing bad had come from them. That changed when the Zelthran ships arrived. Captain Marcus Webb saw them first on his monitors at the defense station. 3 massive vessels, dark green and covered in strange symbols, hung in orbit above the colony. Marcus was responsible for keeping New Haven safe, but his small defense force had only 2 patrol ships and some ground weapons. Against the Zelthran, he had nothing. He opened a communication channel. "Zelthran vessels, this is New Haven Colony. Please state your purpose." The reply came in cold, mechanical tones. "We are conducting surveys. We will not interfere with your settlement. Continue your activities." Marcus didn't like it, but what could he do? The Zelthran were one of the most powerful species in the galaxy. They had technology that made human weapons look like stones and sticks. If they wanted to survey the planet, he couldn't stop them. The Zelthran didn't lie. They were surveying, but their definition of surveying was different from what humans understood. Dr. Kesseth stood on the bridge of the research vessel, his reptilian eyes studying the scanner data. The Zelthran were scientists always looking for new specimens to study. This planet had a young settlement of the newest species to reach space. Humans. Barely 50 years since their first crewed ships left their homeworld. "They are primitive," his assistant said. "Barely worthy of study." Dr. Kesseth disagreed. "Every species must be catalogued. Send the collection team to the surface. Find a specimen that shows typical development." On the ground, Emma had chased her glowing bug past the security fence. She didn't see the warning signs. She was focused on the pretty insect that landed on a rock. When she reached for it, a beam of light surrounded her. She felt her body become weightless. The world blurred. Then she was somewhere else. Emma blinked. She stood in a white room with walls that glowed. Strange creatures surrounded her. They were tall, with green-scaled skin and eyes like snakes. They made clicking sounds to each other. One of them reached toward her. Emma screamed. Catherine found Emma's shoe by the fence 20 minutes later. Her scream brought Daniel running. He took one look at the shoe, at the disturbed dust, and knew something terrible had happened. His military training kicked in. He studied the ground and saw the mark of a transporter beam. "Marcus," Daniel said into his communicator, his voice shaking. "Someone took my daughter." Marcus ran scans immediately. The transporter's signature matched the Zelthran ship. He opened a channel to them, his hands trembling with anger and fear. "Zelthran vessel, we have detected a transporter activation in our colony. Did you take one of our people?" The reply was dismissive. "We collected a biological sample for study. It is within our rights under galactic research protocols. That was a child, a human child. Return her immediately!" "The specimen will be returned when our studies are complete. This is standard procedure." Marcus wanted to fire every weapon he had at that ship, but it would do nothing except get everyone killed. He sent an emergency message to Earth instead. On the Zelthran research vessel, Dr. Kesseth observed the small human through the glass wall of her holding cell. The child had stopped screaming and now sat in the corner, her arms wrapped around her knees. Her face was wet with tears. "Interesting emotional response," Dr. Kesseth noted. "The juvenile shows advanced distress behaviors. Begin recording all reactions." Emma stared at the monsters watching her. She called for her mother, but no one came. She called for her father, but only the clicking sounds answered. After a while, she stopped calling. The crying made her tired and nothing changed. So she watched them instead. The way they moved, the patterns of lights on the walls, the times they came to bring her food. Even at 7 years old, Emma Collins was learning. And planning. On Earth, the message from New Haven reached the Global Defense Council within 2 hours. President Helen Morrison read it 3 times before she believed it. Someone had taken a human child, not killed in an accident, not lost in space, taken, stolen for experiments. She called an emergency meeting of every human leader across 15 star systems. When they gathered on the video screens, her face was pale, but her voice was steel. "They took one of our children," she said, "a 7-year-old girl named Emma Collins. The Zelthran Consortium refuses to return her. They claim she is a research specimen." The silence that followed was terrible. Then every leader began speaking at once, their voices rising in anger. President Morrison raised her hand. "We will bring her home. I don't care what it costs. I don't care what we have to do. But we will bring Emma Collins home." Does anyone disagree? No one did. Admiral Richard Hayes received his orders while his fleet was conducting training exercises near the Outer Rim. He was a veteran of 40 years, a careful man who avoided wars when possible. He read the mission brief about Emma Collins and felt something break inside his chest. He opened a channel to every ship in his fleet. 47 warships, the 5th Fleet, the pride of human military power. "All ships, this is Admiral Hayes. We have a rescue mission. A human child has been taken by the Zelthran. We are going to get her back. Prepare for immediate jump to New Haven. Full battle readiness. We leave in 1 hour." Not a single captain hesitated. They all had children of their own, or remembered being children themselves. The fleet jumped to faster than light speed, racing toward New Haven. The Zelthran received diplomatic messages from Earth. Ambassador Susan Price used careful words, but beneath them was a clear message. "Give back the child or face consequences." The Zelthran leadership laughed. These humans were so new to space. They had a small fleet and limited technology. They were no threat to the consortium, which controlled 12 star systems and had crushed rebellions for centuries. The Zelthran had fought wars against species far more dangerous than humans. They sent a reply. The specimen would be returned when research was completed. Standard protocol. The humans should calm down. On New Haven, Daniel Collins stood at the observation window, staring at the Zelthran ship in orbit. Catherine stood beside him, tears running down her face. Marcus had explained there was nothing they could do but wait for the fleet from Earth. "How long?" Daniel asked. 3 days, Marcus said quietly. Daniel's jaw tightened. Emma was up there, alone and afraid. Every second felt like years. He had left his military career to protect his daughter from violence. Now violence had found her anyway, and he was helpless to stop it. But the 5th Fleet was coming. And with them, they brought something the Zelthran didn't understand. They brought the fury of every human parent who ever loved a child. They brought a lesson the galaxy was about to learn. You could negotiate with humans. You could trade with them. You could even fight them in honest war, but you should never ever touch their children. Because that was the one line that, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. And the response would be terrible beyond measure. The 5th Fleet dropped out of faster-than-light speed at the edge of the New Haven system. 47 warships appeared like angry stars, their weapons already charging. Admiral Richard Hayes stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Valiant, and studied the tactical display. The Zelthran research vessel hung in orbit, protected by 12 escort ships. "Status report," Richard said calmly. "All ships ready for combat, sir. Weapon systems at full power. Marines prepared for boarding action," his tactical officer replied. Richard nodded. He was 60 years old, with gray hair and a face marked by decades of command. He had fought pirates and put down rebellions. He had seen battle and death. But nothing in his career had prepared him for the cold rage he felt now. A child. They had taken a child. "Open a channel to the Zelthran vessels," he ordered. The face of war leader Thex appeared on the screen. The Zelthran commander looked bored, his reptilian features showing no concern about the human fleet that had just arrived. "Human vessels, you are trespassing in consortium research space. Withdraw immediately or face consequences," Thex said. Richard's voice was quiet and deadly. "You have one human child aboard your research vessel. Her name is Emma Collins. You will return her to us within 1 hour unharmed. If you comply, we will leave peacefully." Thex made a clicking sound that might have been laughter. "The specimen is undergoing standard research protocols. She will be returned to your colony when our studies are complete, as we have already informed your government. Your threats are meaningless. Our fleet is superior to yours in every way. 1 hour, Richard repeated. Then he cut the transmission. On the planet below, Daniel Collins watched the tactical display in Marcus's command center. 47 human ships faced 12 Zeltran vessels. The numbers looked good, but Marcus had explained that Zeltran ships were more advanced. Their shields were stronger, their weapons more powerful. This could be a massacre. Daniel didn't care about the odds. His daughter was up there. They'll get her back, Catherine whispered, holding his hand tight. Daniel said nothing. He just watched the clock count down. On the Zeltran research vessel, Dr. Kesseth was annoyed by the interruption. He had been running cognitive tests on the human juvenile when War Leader Thex contacted him about the situation. The human fleet was making threats, but that was irrelevant. The consortium had faced far more dangerous enemies and always won. Continue with the testing, Dr. Kesseth ordered his team. This political matter does not concern us. Emma sat in her cell, no longer crying. She had learned that the walls made a small echo if she tapped them in certain places. She had learned that the door opened when one of the creatures pressed 3 symbols in sequence. She had watched them do it 17 times now. The symbols looked like a circle, a line, and a triangle. She was 7 years old, but she was human. And humans learned. The hour passed slowly. On the Valiant, Richard Hayes stood perfectly still, watching the clock. His crew was tense, ready for battle. Below on New Haven, 2,000 colonists held their breath. Across human space, billions watched the live feed, praying for one little girl. When the hour ended, the Zeltran had not responded. Richard took a deep breath. He thought about his own granddaughter, safe on Earth. He thought about what it would feel like to have her taken, studied like an animal, kept in a cage. The rage that filled him was cold and pure. All ships, he said into the fleet channel, weapons free. Bring Emma home. The battle began with a fury that shocked the Zeltran. Human ships didn't stay at long range where Zeltran shields were strongest. They charged forward, closing to knife-fighting distance with reckless speed. The Zeltran fired their heavy weapons and human ships took damage, but they kept coming. The destroyer Thunder took a direct hit that shattered half its hull. Its captain, Commander Lisa Grant, rerouted all power to engines and rammed her dying ship into a Zeltran cruiser. Both vessels exploded in a ball of fire. The frigate Defender used a micro-jump, appearing inside the Zeltran formation. At point-blank range, its missiles couldn't miss. 3 Zeltran escorts died in the first 30 seconds. War Leader Thex watched in horror as his orderly battle plan collapsed. These humans fought like madmen, accepting terrible losses to close range and tear at his ships. Where were their tactics? Where was their discipline? They fought like animals, protecting their young, which, he realized too late, was exactly what they were. All ships, fall back to protect the research vessel, Thex ordered. But the human assault was relentless. Boarding pods, small craft carrying Marines in battle armor, punched through Zeltran hulls using shaped nuclear charges. Human soldiers poured into Zeltran ships, fighting corridor by corridor. On the Valiant, Richard watched the tactical display. His fleet was taking heavy damage. 6 ships were destroyed, 3 more crippled, but the Zeltran were breaking. Their formation was in chaos, their ships trying to retreat while protecting the research vessel. Target that research ship, Richard ordered. All weapons. The research vessel tried to run, its engines flaring as it turned away from the battle. But the human ships were everywhere now, surrounding it like wolves around prey. Lisa Grant's replacement, Commander Paul Chen in the destroyer Hammer, jumped his ship directly into the research vessel's path. Zeltran research vessel. This is Commander Chen. Stop your engines and return Emma Collins to us, or I will cut through your hull and take her myself. Dr. Kesseth finally understood that this was serious. These humans were actually willing to die for one juvenile specimen. It made no scientific sense. But then he was beginning to realize that humans didn't think like Zeltran. They thought with emotions, with connections that he had never bothered to study. Send armed teams to secure the specimen, Dr. Kesseth ordered. She may be useful as a bargaining tool. But when the Zeltran Marines reached Emma's cell, they found it empty. Emma had watched them press the symbols 19 times total. On the 20th time, when they brought her the tasteless food they called nutrition paste, she had memorized the sequence perfectly. Circle, line, triangle. After they left, she waited. She was small and scared, but she was also her father's daughter. Daniel had taught her to be brave. He had taught her to think. So when the lights in her cell turned red and alarms began to sound, she knew something was happening. She reached up to the control panel by the door. Her small fingers pressed the circle. Then the line. Then the triangle. The door opened. Emma ran into the corridor looking for a place to hide. She could hear strange sounds, explosions, and weapon fire. The ship shook. She found a vent in the wall and pulled at the cover. It came loose and she crawled inside, clutching a piece of sharp metal she had torn from her bed frame. If the monsters found her, she would fight. Human breaching teams cut through the research vessel's hull using plasma torches. Sergeant Paul Mason led his squad through the hole, their weapons ready. They had one mission: find Emma Collins and bring her home. Paul activated the tracker that Marcus had given them. Before Emma was born, Daniel Collins had sewn a tiny emergency beacon into all of her clothes, a habit from his military days. It was old tech, simple and reliable. And right now it was broadcasting her location. "She's in the ventilation system, Section 4, Paul said. "Move out." His squad fought through the Zelthrin crew, stunning rather than killing when possible. They weren't here for revenge, just for one little girl. But any Zelthrin who stood in their way went down hard. They found the vent and Paul pulled off the cover. Inside, curled up in the darkness, was Emma Collins. She held a piece of metal like a knife, her eyes wide with fear. When she saw Paul's face through his helmet visor, human and kind, something broke inside her. She started to cry again, the first tears since she had stopped calling for her parents. "Hey there, Emma," Paul said gently. "I'm Paul. Your dad sent me to bring you home. Are you okay?" Emma dropped the metal and reached for him. Paul lifted her carefully, checking her for injuries. She seemed unhurt, just terrified. He wrapped her in his jacket and held her close. "I've got you, sweetheart. You're safe now." The squad fought their way back to the breach point, Paul carrying Emma the whole way. She buried her face in his shoulder, not looking at the battle around them. When they reached the boarding pod, Paul strapped her in and gave the pilot the order to return to the Valiant. On the bridge, Richard Hayes received the message. "Package secure. Emma Collins is safe." Richard felt something loosen in his chest. "All ships, cease fire. Repeat, cease fire. Secure the research vessel, and take all Zelthrin personnel into custody. Someone contact New Haven and tell the Collins family their daughter is coming home." War leader Thex, his fleet shattered and his mission failed, watched the humans secure the research vessel. He had lost 9 ships and over 3,000 crew. The humans had lost 6 ships and 2,000 crew. By any military standard, the losses were roughly equal, but the humans had won. Because they had Emma, and Thex finally understood that to humans that was all that mattered. On New Haven, Daniel Collins collapsed when he heard the news. Catherine held him as he wept, and for the first time in 3 days they were tears of relief instead of fear. Their daughter was alive. She was safe. She was coming home. Emma Collins sat in the medical bay of the Valiant, wrapped in a blanket. The human doctor had checked her completely and found no serious injuries. Some bruises, dehydration, and exhaustion, but her body would heal. Her mind was another question. Admiral Richard Hayes sat beside her, speaking softly. "Your parents are waiting for you on the planet. We'll have you home in a few hours." Emma looked at him with eyes that seemed older than 7 years. "Why did they take me?" Richard struggled for an answer. "How do you explain to a child that some beings saw her as nothing more than an animal to study? That they didn't recognize her as a person who mattered? Because they made a mistake," he finally said. "They didn't understand that you're important, that you're loved, that you're someone's daughter. Are you going to punish them?" Emma asked. Richard nodded slowly. "Yes, we are." The news of Emma's rescue spread across human space within hours, but it also reached the Galactic Council, the loose organization of elder species that tried to maintain order among the stars. 12 species, including the Zelthrin, filed formal complaints against humanity. They claimed the response was excessive, that humans had violated established research protocols, that the destruction of the Zelthrin fleet was an act of war. The council called an emergency session. Ambassador Susan Price received the summons while on Earth. She was a veteran diplomat, 65 years old, who had spent 20 years building relationships with alien species. She had always believed in peaceful solutions, in finding common ground. But when she read the complaints, when she saw species arguing that human children were fair targets for research, Something cold settled into her heart. She requested that Daniel and Catherine Collins be allowed to attend as witnesses. The council agreed. The council chamber was enormous, a circular room that could hold representatives from 100 species. Susan walked to the center platform, Daniel and Catherine beside her. Around them, aliens of every shape watched. Some looked sympathetic. Many looked angry or afraid. The Zelthran delegation looked furious. The council speaker, a floating being of pure energy named Zephon, opened the session. Ambassador Price, your species stands accused of excessive violence, violation of research protocols, and unprovoked assault on consortium vessels. What is your response? Susan activated a holographic display. Images appeared above the platform, showing Emma's cell on the research vessel, the cold white walls, the cameras watching her, the clinical detachment of her captors. The council watched in silence as the footage played. Then Susan spoke, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber. You want to discuss protocols? Let me tell you about human protocols. We don't experiment on children. We don't take them from their families. We don't treat them as specimens. And when someone does, we respond. A Zelthran counselor stood, his scales shimmering with anger. The juvenile was going to be returned unharmed. Your response destroyed 9 ships and killed thousands. How is that proportional? Susan turned to face him directly. How many of your children would you allow to be taken before responding? Give me a number. The Zelthran counselor hesitated. That is not relevant. We follow scientific protocols. It's completely relevant, Susan said, because we've given you our answer. 0, not 1. Not 10. 0. Touch a human child and you face all of humanity. Every ship, every soldier, every parent who ever loved their son or daughter. Is that disproportionate? Maybe, but it's honest. Daniel Collins stepped forward. The council hadn't expected him to speak, but Susan yielded the platform to him. Daniel looked around the chamber at species who had lived among the stars for thousands of years. He was just a farmer now, a father who wanted a quiet life. I used to tuck Emma into bed every night, Daniel said quietly. I would read her stories about brave knights and distant planets. She would ask me if the stars were friendly, and I would tell her yes because I wanted her to grow up without fear. His voice grew harder. Then your species took her. You put her in a cage and studied her like an animal. For 3 days, I didn't know if she was dead or alive. For 3 days, my wife couldn't sleep. For 3 days, we lived in a nightmare. Daniel looked at the Zelthran delegation. You call her a specimen. She's my daughter. She's 7 years old. She likes drawing pictures and chasing bugs. She's scared of thunderstorms. She laughs when I make silly voices, and if you ever touch her or any human child again, what happened at New Haven will be the least of your problems. The chamber erupted in arguing voices. Some species supported humanity's response. Others called it dangerous precedent. The debate went on for hours. Finally, an ancient being spoke. Ambassador Quell of the Myrix race had lived for 4 centuries and rarely involved himself in council politics. When he rose to speak, the chamber fell silent. I have watched species rise and fall for longer than most of you have existed, Quell said, his voice like wind through caves. I have seen wars fought over resources, over territory, over pride. But this is the first time I have seen a war fought over love. He gestured to the humans. The Zelthran made a fundamental error. They assumed humanity's peaceful approach meant weakness. They forgot that the most dangerous creature in any forest is not the predator hunting for food, but the parent protecting its young. The humans responded exactly as any sentient species should when their children are threatened. The failure here is not their response, but our failure to recognize them as equals. The council vote was close, but ultimately they issued no sanctions against humanity. However, the decision satisfied no one. The Zelthran withdrew from the proceedings, humiliated and enraged. Their war council met in secret that very night. Supreme War Leader Vexar addressed the assembled military commanders. The humans have made fools of us. They destroyed a consortium fleet and face no consequences. This cannot stand. We must show them their proper place in the galactic order. What do you propose? One commander asked. Vexar's eyes glittered with cold fury. We assemble a punitive fleet, 5 times the size of what we lost at New Haven. We strike at their colonies until they beg for mercy. We show the galaxy what happens when primitive species challenge their betters. The vote was unanimous. The consortium began gathering ships from across their territory. They would teach humanity a lesson that would echo across the stars. On Earth, Military intelligence intercepted reports of the Zelthran mobilization within days. President Helen Morrison called an emergency meeting of the Defense Council. Admiral Richard Hayes, newly promoted to Supreme Commander of Human Defense Forces, presented the situation. "They're coming with everything they have," Richard said. "Current estimates suggest 200 ships, possibly more. They plan to hit our outer colonies first, working their way toward our core systems. Can we stop them?" President Morrison asked. Richard was quiet for a moment. "If we mobilize everything we have, pull back from all non-essential positions, and prepare properly, we have a chance. But it will cost us a lot." "Then we mobilize," Morrison said firmly. "Send the order to every human world. Evacuate civilians from the outer colonies. Fortify the core systems. Build every ship we can. And make sure every species in the galaxy knows what's coming. If the Zelthran want war, we'll give them war." The mobilization that followed shocked the galactic community. Humanity had hidden their true industrial capacity during their first decades in space, preferring to seem smaller and less threatening than they were. Now the mask came off. Shipyards ran at full capacity. New weapon systems designed specifically to counter Zelthran advantages moved into production. Human colonies that had seemed peaceful farming worlds revealed hidden defense platforms. The newcomers were showing teeth that no one knew they had. Other species watched and made their own calculations. The Myrics quietly offered intelligence on Zelthran fleet movements. Several smaller species, who had suffered under consortium arrogance for years, began providing support through back channels. The galactic balance of power was shifting, and everyone wanted to be on the winning side. On New Haven, Emma Collins returned home to a hero's welcome. The entire colony came out to greet her. She held her parents' hands tight, overwhelmed by the attention. She just wanted to go home to sleep in her own bed, to forget the white cell and the clicking sounds. But she couldn't forget. None of them could. Because what happened to Emma had changed everything. She was a symbol now, whether she wanted to be or not. The child who showed the galaxy that humanity's peaceful nature had limits, the line that could not be crossed. Daniel Collins watched the ships gathering in orbit, new defense platforms being installed around his colony. New Haven would never be helpless again. No human colony would be. They had paid the price for their innocence, and now they would never be innocent again. "Is the war going to come here?" Emma asked one night, looking up at the stars from her bedroom window. Daniel sat beside her, putting his arm around her shoulders. "Maybe, but if it does, we'll be ready. And no one will ever take you again." "I promise." Emma leaned against her father. She had nightmares now, dreams of white cells and alien eyes. But she also had something else. She had the knowledge that when she was taken, every human fleet in space had come for her. Thousands of soldiers had fought for her. People she had never met had died to bring her home. The Zelthran punitive fleet emerged from faster-than-light speed at the edge of the Port Darwin system. 200 ships, the largest force the consortium had assembled in 50 years, hung in space like a dark cloud. Supreme War Leader Vexar studied the tactical display with satisfaction. The human colony was there, its orbital platforms visible on scanners. "Begin the assault," Vexar ordered. "Destroy everything." The fleet moved forward in perfect formation. Then the trap sprang. Automated defense platforms hidden in the asteroid belt around Port Darwin activated simultaneously. Hundreds of them, each carrying enough missiles to cripple a cruiser. The Zelthran formation, packed tight for an overwhelming assault, suddenly faced a storm of incoming fire from multiple directions. "Evasive action," Vexar shouted, but it was too late for the lead ships. 12 Zelthran vessels died in the first 30 seconds, torn apart by missiles that came from everywhere at once. Then human ships appeared. They didn't come from the colony. They came from behind the Zelthran fleet, from hiding spots in the outer system where they had waited in complete silence for days. 40 human warships, all their power systems shut down to avoid detection, suddenly activated and charged forward. Admiral Richard Hayes commanded the ambush from the Valiant. All ships full attack. Hit them hard. The battle that followed was chaos. The Zelthran, expecting an easy victory, found themselves fighting on two fronts. Their formation broke as ships tried to respond to threats from multiple directions. Human vessels, outnumbered but prepared, used tactics the Zelthran had never seen. The destroyer Phoenix jumped to faster-than-light speed for exactly 3 seconds, reappearing inside the Zelthran formation. At point-blank range, Commander Jake Foster fired every weapon his ship had. then jumped away before the enemy could respond. He repeated this pattern 8 times, appearing and vanishing like a ghost, leaving destroyed Zelthran ships in his wake. The frigate ranger released a cloud of small drones that looked like debris on scanners. When Zelthran ships passed through the cloud, the drones activated, attaching to hulls and detonating. 10 escorts died before the Zelthran figured out what was happening. On the ground at Port Darwin, the colony appeared to be a normal settlement. But when Zelthran dropships tried to land Marines, they discovered the truth. Every building was a fortified bunker. Every colonist was armed and trained. The farming equipment could be converted to weapons in minutes. Lieutenant Chris Baker commanded the defense of the main spaceport. His platoon of 80 soldiers faced 300 Zelthran Marines. The odds were terrible, but Chris had spent 3 weeks preparing this battlefield. Every corridor was trapped. Every room had firing positions. The Zelthran advanced into a nightmare. "Hold position, Alpha," Chris said into his radio. "Let them come to us." The Zelthran pushed forward, confident in their numbers and superior armor. Then the charges hidden in the walls detonated. The ceiling collapsed on the lead squad. Human soldiers fired from concealed positions, then retreated through passages the enemy didn't know existed. The battle for the spaceport lasted 18 hours. Chris and his platoon held the critical junction that controlled access to the colony's shield generators. When Zelthran forces finally breached their position, they found the humans had rigged the entire section with fusion charges. Chris looked at his remaining soldiers. 23 were still alive, all wounded. The enemy was breaking through the last barrier. He thought about Emma Collins, about every human child who deserved to grow up safe. He activated the detonator. The explosion killed 400 Zelthran Marines and all 23 human soldiers. But the shield generators remained intact and the colony survived. In space, the battle was turning. The Zelthran had lost 40 ships to the ambush and were now fighting desperately to regroup. Supreme War Leader Vexar couldn't understand how the humans had hidden so many defense platforms, how they had kept ships in position for days without being detected. The answer was simple. Humans were good at waiting, good at patience, good at setting traps. They had learned these lessons in a million years of evolution as hunters on Earth, and they applied them perfectly to space warfare. "All ships, retreat to Rally Point Beta," Vexar ordered. His fleet jumped away, leaving the Port Darwin system in human hands. But this was only the first battle. Over the next 6 weeks, the war spread across 17 star systems. The Zelthran adapted to human tactics, and humans adapted right back. Both sides took heavy losses. Entire fleets clashed in the darkness between stars. Colonies burned. Thousands died on both sides. But the Zelthran were fighting a war of choice, trying to punish humanity for their defiance. The humans were fighting for survival, for their children, for their future. And that made all the difference. The galactic community watched in horror as 2 species tore at each other. Several neutral species tried to mediate peace talks. Both sides refused. The Zelthran demanded total human surrender. The humans demanded the consortium acknowledge their children as inviolate and pay reparations. Neither would compromise. Then Supreme War Leader Vexar made a fatal decision. Frustrated by 6 weeks of grinding warfare, enraged by losses that exceeded anything in consortium history, he decided to break human will by attacking their homeworld. If Earth fell, humanity would have to surrender. He gathered every ship he had left, pulling vessels from garrison duties across consortium space. 130 ships, all that remained of the punitive fleet. It would be enough. It had to be enough. The fleet jumped toward the Sol system, toward Earth. President Helen Morrison received warning of the incoming fleet 3 hours before they arrived. She stood in the war room deep beneath the surface, surrounded by military leaders and government officials. Everyone knew what this meant. The Zelthran were coming for Earth itself. "What are our chances?" she asked Admiral Hayes. Richard looked at the tactical display. The home fleet had 60 ships protecting Sol. The orbital defense platforms around Earth were the most advanced humanity had ever built. But they were facing more than twice their number in enemy vessels. "We'll stop them," Richard said simply. "Whatever it costs, we'll stop them." He walked to the communication station and opened a channel to every ship in the Sol system. Every captain, every crew member, everyone who wore a human military uniform heard his voice. "This is Admiral Hayes. The enemy is coming to Earth, to our homes, to our families. to the world where humanity was born. They think they can break us by attacking our heart. They're wrong. We're going to show them that Earth doesn't break. Earth fights. And when you fight for your home, you don't lose. All ships prepare for battle. Make them regret they ever came here. The Zelthran fleet emerged from faster-than-light speed at the edge of the Sol system. Vexar looked at his displays and saw what he expected, a human fleet waiting for them. Defense platforms around Earth and Mars. Mining stations in the asteroid belt. Begin the assault, he ordered. Straight to Earth. Ignore everything else. The fleet accelerated toward the inner system at full speed. Then they learned what humanity had really built during their decades in space. The asteroid belt wasn't just mining stations. It was a weapons grid, thousands of platforms, each controlled by artificial intelligence, each capable of independent targeting. When the Zelthran fleet entered range, the entire belt opened fire, the sky filled with missiles, railgun rounds, and energy beams. The Zelthran shields, powerful as they were, couldn't stop everything. Ships began taking damage immediately. Vexar ordered his fleet to push through, to accept the losses and reach Earth. Then the human fleet attacked. Richard Hayes had learned every lesson from 6 weeks of warfare. He knew the Zelthran tactics now, knew their strengths and weaknesses. And he had one advantage they didn't. He was fighting to protect his homeworld, and that made him willing to do anything. All ships, full speed. Close-range engagement, Richard ordered. The human fleet charged into the Zelthran formation like wolves into a herd. Ships traded fire at distances measured in kilometers instead of thousands of kilometers. Human captains deliberately rammed damaged vessels into enemy ships when their weapons failed. Fighter pilots on suicide runs took out Zelthran command cruisers. The battle was terrible. 30 human ships died in the first hour, but they took 50 Zelthran vessels with them. The enemy fleet, already battered by the asteroid belt defenses, began to break apart. On Earth, billions of people watched the battle on live feeds. They saw ships explode. They saw the sky above their planet filled with fire and death. They saw human crews sacrifice themselves to stop the enemy advance. And they saw the moment when Supreme War Leader Vexar's flagship, damaged and surrounded, tried to retreat. Richard Hayes, his own ship crippled and dying, gave one last order. The Valiant, engines failing and hull breached in a dozen places, rammed directly into the Zelthran command vessel. Both ships exploded in a flash of light visible from Earth's surface. The battle lasted 47 minutes total. When it ended, the Zelthran punitive fleet no longer existed. Of the 130 ships that attacked Earth, none escaped. They were destroyed, captured, or so damaged they drifted helplessly in space. The human home fleet was shattered. Only 18 ships remained functional. But Earth was safe. Humanity had won. The peace negotiations took place on Sanctuary Station, a neutral facility maintained by the Galactic Council. Ambassador Susan Price sat across from the Zelthran delegation, and the weight of 8,000 dead humans pressed on her shoulders. She carried with her the grief of a species that had lost fathers, mothers, sons, and daughters, but she also carried their victory. The Zelthran delegates looked different now. Their scales seemed duller, their eyes less arrogant. The consortium had lost not just the war, but their reputation. Their client species were declaring independence. Their economy was collapsing. Their military was gone. State your terms, the Zelthran lead negotiator said quietly. Susan opened a document and began reading. The terms were harsh but not cruel. First, Dr. Kesseth and every researcher involved in Emma's abduction would be turned over to human authorities for trial. The Zelthran agreed immediately. They had already arrested the research team themselves. Second, the consortium would establish formal protocols recognizing all spacefaring species children as protected beings. Any violation would be treated as an act of war by the entire Galactic Council. The Zelthran hesitated, then agreed. They had no choice. Third, the consortium would pay reparations, not in money but in technology transfers, medical advances, shield technology, faster-than-light improvements, everything humanity needed to accelerate their development by a century. The Zelthran protested this term. You're demanding we give you the tools to surpass us. Susan looked at them with cold eyes. You declared war on us over a child. You attacked Earth itself. You're lucky we're offering peace terms at all instead of hunting down every consortium world and burning them to ash. Take the deal. They took the deal, but the final term was what changed galactic civilization forever. Humanity demanded the Galactic Council pass a formal law. Any species that harmed a human child, anywhere in the galaxy, would face the unified response of all humanity. Not negotiation. Not diplomacy. Immediate military action. You're asking us to make your children sacred by law, a council member protested. This sets a dangerous precedent. Susan stood and faced the assembled representatives of 100 species. Then let it be dangerous. Let every species know that if they want peace with humanity, they leave our children alone. If they want war, they know exactly how to get it. You've seen what we'll do for one child. Imagine what we'll do for 100. For 1,000, the vote took 3 days. In the end, it passed by a narrow margin. Not because the council agreed, but because they were terrified of what would happen if they didn't. The Battle of Earth had shown them what humans were capable of when fighting for their families. The law became known as Emma's Law, named for the 7-year-old girl whose abduction had started everything. Across the galaxy, human children became untouchable, not through respect or goodwill, but through fear of what their parents would do to anyone who harmed them. On Earth, Emma Collins attended the treaty signing via video link from New Haven. She was 8 years old now, standing between her parents wearing a simple blue dress. Reporters from 100 worlds transmitted her image across civilized space. She had become a symbol, though she didn't fully understand what that meant. The child who showed the galaxy that humanity's peaceful nature was a choice, not a weakness. The girl who proved that humans would sacrifice everything for their young. Daniel Collins held his daughter's hand as they watched the Zelthran representative sign the treaty. Catherine stood on Emma's other side, tears running down her face. Their daughter was safe. Every human child was safer because of what had happened. But the cost had been terrible. 8,000 dead at Earth alone. Thousands more across 6 weeks of warfare. Colonies damaged or destroyed. Admiral Richard Hayes, the man who brought Emma home and gave his life protecting Earth, was gone. President Helen Morrison spoke at Richard's funeral, held at Arlington National Cemetery on Earth. Millions attended in person. Billions watched across human space. Richard Hayes was a father, a grandfather, and a soldier, Morrison said. He understood that some things are worth dying for, that protecting our children is not just a duty, but the most fundamental purpose of any society. He gave his life so that Earth would remain free, so that our children could grow up without fear. We honor him not with monuments, though those will come, but by remembering why he fought, and by never letting anyone forget what happens when they threaten what we love. The galaxy changed after the war. The Zelthran Consortium collapsed over the next decade, breaking into smaller independent states. New alliances formed with humanity at the center of many. Other species approached Earth carefully now with respect born from fear and a grudging admiration. The humans had proven themselves, not as merchants or diplomats, but as warriors, as parents willing to burn the galaxy down to protect their young. It earned them a place at the table of galactic powers, but it also meant they could never go back to being the innocent newcomers, exploring the stars with wonder. On New Haven, life slowly returned to normal. The defense platforms remained in orbit, permanent reminders that the colony would never be helpless again. Daniel Collins went back to farming his wheat fields. Catherine returned to teaching at the colony school. Emma grew up surrounded by love and protection. But Emma had nightmares. She dreamed of white cells and clicking sounds. She woke up crying, and her parents would hold her until she fell back asleep. The doctors said the trauma might never fully heal. She had been taken, studied, kept in a cage. Some scars don't fade. On her 9th birthday, Emma asked her father about the war, about how many people died because of her. Daniel knelt down to look her in the eyes. Listen to me carefully, Emma. None of this was your fault. You didn't ask to be taken. You didn't start the war. The Zelthran did that when they took you, and we ended it when we brought you home and made sure it would never happen again. But people died, Emma whispered. Admiral Hayes died. Daniel nodded slowly.
Yes, and if Richard Hayes was here right now, he would tell you he'd do it again.
Because that's what humans do. We protect our children. All of them. And we don't apologize for it. Emma hugged her father tight. She didn't fully understand yet, but one day she would. One day she would realize that her abduction had revealed humanity's true nature to the galaxy. That underneath their smiles and diplomacy was something ancient and fierce. The protective instinct of a species that had fought its way to the top of Earth's food chain. and never forgot how to fight. 10 years after the war, Emma Collins was 17 years old. She stood on the observation deck of a human cruiser, looking out at the stars. She had joined the diplomatic corps, following in Ambassador Susan Price's footsteps. She wanted to build bridges between species, to create a galaxy where what happened to her could never happen to anyone else. But she also trained in combat. She learned to pilot ships and fire weapons, because she understood now what her father had taught her. Peace was valuable, but only if you were strong enough to defend it. A young ensign approached her. "Miss Collins, we're approaching the Mirrex homeworld. Ambassador Quell requested to meet with you personally." Emma nodded and headed to the shuttle bay. Ambassador Quell, the ancient being who had spoken for humanity at the council, had become a friend over the years. He had watched her grow up, had sent her gifts and messages of encouragement. When she arrived on the Mirrex homeworld, Quell greeted her in his dwelling, a cave filled with crystals that hummed with soft light. "Emma Collins," Quell said in his wind-like voice, "you have grown strong." "I had good teachers," Emma replied. Quell was silent for a moment. "Do you hate the Zelthrin? For what they did to you?" Emma considered the question carefully. "I hate what they did. I hate that they saw me as a thing instead of a person. But hatred is exhausting. I'd rather work to make sure it never happens again." Quell made a sound that might have been approval. "You are wise beyond your years. Your species surprised us all, Emma. We thought we understood humans. We thought we knew what you were. Then you showed us that the most dangerous thing in the galaxy is not the warrior seeking glory, but the parent protecting their child." "Is that what we are to you now?" Emma asked. "Dangerous? You are what you have always been," Quell said. "A young species finding your place among the stars. But now we know that place includes a line that must not be crossed, and we are grateful for that clarity. Better to know the boundaries than to discover them through tragedy." Emma looked out at the Mirrex sunset, thinking about the child she had been and the woman she was becoming. She thought about the people who died bringing her home, about Admiral Hayes and Lieutenant Baker and thousands of others whose names she had memorized. "Do you think they'll remember?" she asked. 100 years from now, will species remember Emma's law? Will they remember why it exists? Quell's ancient eyes studied her. "They will remember, because humanity will make sure they do. That is your gift and your burden. You will never let the galaxy forget that your children are precious, that you will fight for them without hesitation or mercy. And in remembering that, the galaxy will be better, safer, more careful about the lives they touch." Emma returned to her ship and looked at the star charts, at the thousands of inhabited systems spread across the galaxy.